Welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. I have with me our in-house property manager expert with 16 years of experience. He's been on the podcast before. He joins us back again this week, Corey Rotunno-Grant from Ray White, Taylor & Partners. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
That's all right. Look, thanks for jumping on. Today I thought we'd talk about how to ethically increase the rent on your property and how to attract good tenants. There's always an article every second week in the news about greedy landlords and that kind of stuff. So I thought it'd be good to get a property manager on who deals with both sides of things and could talk to us about ways in which we can increase the rent. But just at the start, high level, who is a property manager and what do they do?
So basically, a property manager is someone who, will find you a tenant, will vet that tenant, who will deal with the day-to-day management of the property, complete inspection reports, ingoings and outgoing inspections, and also regular periodic inspections as well. Yep. Someone who can assist managing your finances, so covering and paying for all your outgoings, so council, water, strata levies, and dealing with the day-to-day maintenance of properties, getting you a reasonable tradesperson who can complete work at a reasonable cost, where, that property manager has built a relationship with a tradesperson where, the client's not going to get ripped off. So someone who, is your eyes and ears and knows pretty much everything that's going on with the property, knows everything that's going on with the landlord, but also with the tenant as well.
Perfect. I think that's a pretty great coverage of it. Important note, sort of probably to add on the back of that is people think owning property is a headache, but I think what people that don't own property maybe don't understand is that you as the property manager, when you set up the bills and the council rates and stuff, I can sort of just get them sent straight to you. So the only person I will deal with when I buy my own property, I will deal with the property manager. I'll sign them up on an agreement, and then, council rates, water bills, all that kind of stuff, maintenance. The property manager looks after all of that, and the tenant, and I just deal with you in terms of when something needs to get done. You pay that bill, and then you guys generally send, is it monthly or fortnightly? You'll send out like the statement of where all the costs were and how much rent you gathered and what was transferred into the account, right?
Correct.
The ledger.
So depending on, each individual owner's requirements. So some owners prefer to get everything at the end of the month where they'll get a statement. Some like mid and end of month payments. But then we have clients who also like to get paid once the tenant pays rent. So it's just dependent on the individual's needs and what they ideally would like. So ideally it's great to have someone it's great to hold those funds until end of month because outgoings do come in throughout the month. So if we are releasing funds earlier, we're not going to have enough money to pay those bills, which then can incur interest, especially with strata levies. So predominantly, it's best to wait to end of month to get your statement with those invoices that have been paid. Otherwise, we're calling you and saying, hey, can you transfer us some funds? You're going to incur some late fees if we don't pay this bill on time.
Not fun. Okay, and you've been a property manager both Sydney, Central Coast, and the Gold Coast. What is because I know there's some ranges, but what would you say is a rough sort of market rate for what a property manager charges and how do they charge? So
this is a very annoying question because
it's not all about price. I will say that.
Yeah,
it's not about price.
And unfortunately, a lot of our competitors are going in at a lower management fee than what we would normally charge. But at the end of the day, you really do get what you pay for. So our stock standard fee is 6.6%, including GST.
Yep.
And so that covers pretty much all aspects of managing your property. But
so when you say 6.6% plus GST, that's 6.6% of the rent, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Yes.
Just want to put that in there in case people are thinking, what, 6.6% of what? You know, the value of the property or, okay.
So say, for instance, if the tenant pays 3 months rent in advance, we're going to pay you that 3 months rent that month, but we'll take the 6.6% out of that entire period. So it's not like, you know, Optus, for instance, where you get a bill of $50 a month. It's 6.6% of that entire income that we receive for that month.
Okay. And
anything we receive.
Is that the same in the Central Coast? Is it roughly,
it does fluctuate.
Yep.
So, you know, on the Gold Coast, you're looking at 7 to 8% plus GST.
Yep.
Gold Coast is anywhere between 5 to 7%. And in Sydney, you know, we see some people charging 3.3%, which, you know, blows my mind because there are overheads that need to be paid, software that needs to be paid, salaries that need to be paid, and you know, at 3.3%, it's not about us making profit. It's you're not covering any of those expenses or any of those overheads that need to be paid.
Yeah, I think that's an important one because especially with your property, it's only got to take one shitty property manager that's, you know, charging the cheapest on the market. I don't really care. I'm not getting enough. They're not getting enough money to be putting the time and effort into it and be able to do all the inspections. To miss an inspection, the 12 months, or not do the proper DD when they're getting the tenant in, to have a property trashed, and then it's an absolute headache. So a lot of people I hear that have terrible experiences with properties because they've got the wrong tenants. You ask the right questions about property managers, that kind of stuff. And someone that was cheaper, they're only 3%, 3.3%. Then it's like, well, this is your issue.
Correct.
Why do you think it's a little bit more expensive in Queensland compared to New South Wales?
It's got to do with the rent. So rents are a lot cheaper. Well, they were a lot cheaper in Queensland. You know, it's been a few years now since I've worked in Queensland, but you know, predominantly rents are cheaper in Queensland. So they need to make money, and they need to be able to cover those overheads, which is why their fees are a lot more expensive. So, for instance, in Perth, from memory, you know, they charge 8-9% plus GST.
Ouch! Yeah,
because their rents are significantly less than what Sydney rents are.
Yep. And how many properties, so you're head of property at Ray White in Darlinghurst there. How many properties are you guys, I don't know if that's something you share, but how many sort of properties are you looking at in terms of your portfolio and your team and stuff like that?
So we're a boutique agency, so we're not, you know, a mammoth machine, which is what we like to pride ourselves on because we've got more time to, you know, properly nurture and build those relationships with those clients. So, you know, we have a portfolio of around between 150 to 180, but then we also have support staff that assist us, and, you know, the management fee assists us in being able to employ those staff. Okay,
and how many staff would you say look after that many properties?
So we've got around 550 at the moment, and we've got
550
as a group.
As a group, okay. But your team, are you saying, is the 150?
So I look after, personally, I look after 180.
Wow, okay.
But I've got, you know, I've got an admin assistant. I've got a leasing consultant who does all the leasing.
Who's your admin assistant?
Jamaica.
Okay.
Yes. Not Tiani.
Yeah.
Tiani's our office manager.
She's here at the studio.
She deals with all of our problems, and she's my problem solver when it comes to day-to-day management of people.
Yep.
So she's been a massive help. But then also our director is very hands-on. Having a property management background, Pete understands what a property manager does. So our director, who, you know, has owned the business for 8 years now, he still does leasing on a Saturday.
Wow.
Whereas you don't see that in other businesses. Pete likes getting his hands dirty. So we've got a really good team who work collaboratively together, and we're really lucky.
So do you think if I'm looking for a property manager and to sign them up, you know, I'm going on realestate.com, I'm seeing like who's prevalent in the area, who's got good reviews and stuff like that. When I sort of talk to them and start to ask these questions and to form a relationship with them, do you think, you know, a ratio of about 150, 180 per person is reasonable, or like, you know, if I go to the person, it's a one man team, and they go, yeah, we've got 600 properties. Like, what is there sort of like a ratio of like enough staff for enough properties, or like a good amount, or anything like that?
It really depends on the property. So, on the portfolio. So, what does that portfolio predominantly have? Are they apartments? Are they terraces? If they're predominantly terraces are a lot of hard work. We've got rising damp, we've got leaking roofs, we've got a lot of maintenance gets involved with terraces. Doing ingoing and outgoing inspections take, you know, sometimes 3 times the amount of time as what an apartment would take, because they're bigger.
Okay.
So it all depends on, I guess, the type of property that portfolio has. So I've got a mixture of terraces and apartments, predominantly in the eastern beaches. So majority of my issues are strata-related issues. So, you know, I try and befriend my strata managers the best I can so that we can get things done. But in terms of numbers, there's really no magic number.
Okay.
But if there's one person managing 600 properties, I would be concerned.
Okay, so it's going to depend on what type of properties they're managing and stuff like that.
Correct.
Okay, spewing. I just thought I'd get like a general rule of thumb, but essentially you want to have comfort knowing that they've got a bit of a support team and enough people to be able to do it right, because there's no use having 1 or 2 people on a very large number of properties, because then they're spread thin, and then, you know, the quality is going to be less.
So one thing that we like to really focus on, it's not so much about the number, it's about the customer service. So if we're not able to deliver the customer service because we're too busy out on the road doing inspections, or, you know, spending hours doing entry reports, then our clients are going to suffer. Our tenants are going to suffer because we're not getting back to them in a timely manner. So that's when we start to look at, okay, what can we do differently to ensure our customer levels remain here and don't drop to there.
Okay. Well, look, what I wanted to bring you on and sort of chat for, I've got a good understanding of sort of property managers, sizing and that kind of stuff, but rent increases, probably before rent increases, I want to look at if I've just bought a property, if I'm buying a property, how can I get the best amount of rent for that? So what are some things that I can do to bring that property up to scratch, or, you know, what's probably the cheapest cost versus the best outcome that I can do on a property to be able to ask potentially a little bit more rent for it? What do you think?
So basically, a tenant's going to walk into that property and imagine themselves living in it. If the paint's shabby, if the carpets are filthy or old, or they're just not within the current style, they're the types of things that we would be recommending you replace or get fixed. So, you know, having a property repainted, putting new carpet in, replacing blinds if blinds need to be replaced, updating light fittings if light fittings need to be replaced. You know, you don't need to go in and rip out bathrooms and kitchens to secure a good tenant, or to maximise your return, unless, you know, we're talking about a kitchen that's falling apart. Different story. But just, I guess, a general rule of thumb is ensuring that the property is freshly painted and it has new carpet or new flooring throughout. One thing that, you know, we're trying to, well, I personally am trying to stay away from is carpet. So instead of having, you know, carpet in living areas, having hardwood flooring instead. You know, a lot of people have a lot of allergies nowadays, and they try and avoid properties that have carpet, even if it is brand new carpet, because dust and mites and all that sort of stuff get buried in them. So it's probably more, and to be honest, hardwood floorings last a lot longer than what carpet does as well. So it's a longer term investment than carpet. So that would be my, I guess.
What about photography and staging?
So you need to have great photography, hands down. You know, I remember the days where, and especially on the Central Coast, where you would literally take a photo with your camera.
Yeah, I had a property manager do that. Took photos of the property on her phone, and it went online, and I was just like,
it doesn't show the property in its true light. And we're not talking about Photoshop and, you know, using those stupid fisheye lenses and stuff like that. But having professional photography, very similar to sales, you're showcasing the property in the best possible light. In terms of staging, look, if we've got a tenant in there and we're reshooting the property and they've got amazing furniture or they've got it styled well, 100% would say, let's use it. If an owner's moving out of a property and they've got it styled really well, let's shoot it like that.
Yep.
But it doesn't generally need to be staged or styled.
Okay, so a little bit different too if you're selling a property. Look, that's good to know. So we've covered a couple. Anything else on in terms of renting property with like I guess it comes down to as well like internal features, like if it's got internal laundry and stuff like that. But that's not really something you can just go and add in like on the drop of a hat, right? There's nothing really else. Just freshly painted, smelling good, and fresh or clean floors, right?
One thing to know is you know, if you've got air conditioning in the property, the air conditioning needs to work. So, you know, if you've got air conditioning in there and it doesn't work, you can't put a clause in the lease and say the air conditioner doesn't work.
Yep.
If the air conditioning unit's there, legally, it needs to be working.
Yeah, okay.
So it's good to, and one thing that we do check before a tenant moves in, we make sure, you know, the aircon's working, the stove's working, dishwasher's working, all of those little things that needs to be fixed are fixed before a tenant moves in. Okay,
perfect. And so I've selected the property manager that I want to go with. You would send through an agreement or do you visit the property first? How does that work?
So it depends. So some of our clients can be overseas. Yep. Ideally, it's good for us to go through the property so that we can give them a true appraisal as to what it's worth in this market. So very similar to sales. But you know, if I've been through the property before, you know, I can give them
the feedback.
Correct. I can give them that advice already. But ideally, it's good to view the property. Then the next step would be, you know, discussing fees, explaining our process, why we charge what we charge, giving them that justification so that, hey, okay, Ray White's charging us X, Y, Z because of X, Y, Z.
Yep.
And then, you know, would send the agreement to them for their review. They would sign the agreement. Once we've got the agreement signed, we'll then look at locking in a photographer if no work is needed, and start the marketing process.
Start the marketing process. Get it online. Do the open homes, and then you're presenting the property owner with the tenants that you think, you know, the best fit for the property. We covered that a little bit on a last podcast. So if you're listening along at home or you're watching, just go back, flick back through a few months when Corey was last on. Gave some great tips in terms of what they look for when they're selecting a tenant. Okay, and then it's just ongoing maintenance and stuff through there. So let's move along, you know, in the property journey. The tenant's been there a year and a half, you know, the market's jumping either way. How does or potentially the landlord wants to up the rent? What's the process? How does it happen? Do we talk to, you know, the property? It's a conversation you have with the property owner. You come up to them and say, hey, look, the market's increasing, we may look to increase the rent too. Do you wait till you hear back from the owner, or, you know, and then when do you go to the tenant? How does that all work?
So I'll rewind that a little bit.
Yep.
So throughout the tenancy, we'll do an inspection. So the first one's at the 3-month part, then every 6 months thereafter. And so when we are inspecting the property, we're also giving that owner an indication as to where their property sits within this market. So they're already starting to get prepared for, okay, you know, my property's gone up $20, $50 a week, so that by the time we come around to having that conversation, they already kind of understand where the market is, because most owners aren't sitting on REA or Domain looking at comparable properties. We are. So we like to keep them up to date with where their property sits in the market throughout the course of the tenancy. Then when it comes towards the end of the tenancy, usually the last 3 months, we'll reach out to the owner and say, Mr. and Mrs. Owner, we'll give them a call. Mr. and Mrs. Owner, you're currently receiving $800 a week. We've done a comparable market report. Looks like you could probably get an additional $100 in this market. What are your thoughts? Are you wanting to move back into the property?
Yep.
Like, what's your position? Which is why we like to reach out, I guess, so far in advance, so that we can be prepared and start moving those wheels. So, if we need to terminate the tenancy, we've got enough time to do so. If we need to increase the rent, we've got enough time to do so. So the first step would be to have that conversation with the owner around that 90-day mark, and see where the owner's head is. Then once the owner has made a decision to say, hey, Corey, I want to increase the rent by $100 a week, we'll then have that conversation with the tenant and say, hey, your lease is coming up for expiry on XYZ date. We've had a chat with the owner, and at this point in time, the property is probably worth an additional $100 a week, depending on what the owner wants. If the owner wants the full $100 increase, or if they want $50, we'll then have that conversation with the tenant and say, hey, your owner is wanting to increase the rent by $100 a week. What are your thoughts? Would you like to sign a new 6 or 12-month lease? Did you want to have a chat with your partner? Did you want to have a think about it over the weekend? But you are going to get a notice emailed to you shortly advising of this increase, because we've got to give you 60 days notice.
And a property manager that makes that call rather than just sending an email saying we're putting your rent up.
Correct.
Nice.
And 9 times out of 10, the tenants really appreciate that call as well, because
100%.
You're making it a human experience. You're not just a robot. You're not just a face behind a computer. You're actually a person. And so I've had a few conversations where tenants have unfortunately lost it because they're big they're increases, but they understand and they appreciate it, rather than them getting that email and being like,
what the hell is this?
Yeah,
it's
WTF, like,
it's out of the blue, right?
Thanks for letting me know, and immediately thinking that the owner and the agent are the worst people in the world.
And then they go on the Facebook comments and online, and
correct,
they hate our landlords and all that kind of stuff. Would you say that if I'm a tenant, I am a tenant, and the landlord's looking for an extra $100 a week, the landlord would be open to something slightly below that if I was to remain in the property? Because my thinking is, and as a landlord and a renter too, is that, you don't want to, the risk of them moving out and getting someone else in, there's wear and tear on the house, there's reletting fees, there's potential vacancies, that if I can maybe get an extra $50 a week or $25 a week, it's better than actually, or sometimes depending on the math that you do and the calculations, it's sometimes better to keep that tenant in there if they've been looking after the property.
110%, 110%. But each owner has their own, I guess, not vendetta, but their own
motives.
Correct, their own motives. So, some owners are, and as you know, and you've said on your podcast, there's been a lot of financial strain for landlords as well. Their interest rates have gone up, and they're feeling the pinch. And owning a property and increasing the rent, it's not for them to, it's not extra money going into their pocket. This money is also going into the banks. So a lot of our clients, what we're seeing is they're actually having to pay a lot more to their banks at the moment, and the rent's not covering any of it. Even a rental increase won't cover it.
No way.
And a lot of our clients have a lot of sympathy for our tenants. We do choose clients who predominantly, most of the time, they're not money hungry people. They are generally nice people who actually care about their tenants. And I've got owners who, they could be getting $500 a week for one of their apartments, and this one in particular, she's keeping her rent at $300 a week.
Wow.
Because her tenant's good. Her tenant doesn't cause her any dramas, and she doesn't want to add that extra financial burden to him.
Wow.
She actually doesn't need the money, so she's okay about it. But then you've got owners who, unfortunately, are getting hit by interest rates.
Yeah.
Their levies are going up. Their council rates are going up. Their water rates are going up. and their insurances are going up. So it's not about, trying to suck every cent out of a tenant. It's, trying to find some sort of happy medium so that they don't have to sell that property.
Okay. So if you're a tenant, you're in there, just make sure you're looking after it as if it's your home. And then when that conversation or when that time does come, that if you've been in there for long enough and the market has increased, hopefully you've got a good property manager like yourself. We can't all have Corey, unfortunately. There's going to be different property managers out there. But hopefully it's a conversation and a bit of a negotiation you can have around like, hey, look, we've been looking after it, or we've been in it for X amount. What about this amount? Or like we're willing to offer an increase of X dollars per week. And you sort of try to fill it out there. At the end of the day, if the landlord, wants them out and can get significantly more, that's almost market rent, and then the landlord knows the risk they're taking. That has to be high enough, the landlord to kick them out, the tenant out. That has to be high enough that the landlord can be like, look, I can afford the reletting fee and a few weeks of vacancies because that amount is so much more on top of the rent that they're paying that it'll cover it. So it's a bit of a calculation to run between, I suppose, landlord, property manager, and tenant, right?
Yeah, and I guess on that point, a lot of our clients aren't about let's kick this tenant out so we can get more money. An example is I've got an apartment in Bondi, and the ceiling is currently, all the paint's flaking off the ceiling. It's a top floor unit, and we've had a quote come in. It's $5,500 to repair, and
is it just paint?
It's paint, and there's a bit of concrete coming down.
Okay.
Rendering.
Just say if it's just paint, I'll do it for $5,000.
We wish it was that easy.
Yeah, okay.
It has been painted in the past, and it just looked terrible.
Yep.
So my suggestion to the owner was, let's get this done properly. That rent at the moment, that's $700 a week for a two-bedder in Bondi.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got an ultra modern kitchen. We're talking COVID prices as well, so we haven't really touched the rent that much. It's got an original Art Deco bathroom, but we had a conversation with the tenant, whereas we said, we're going to do this work. Unfortunately, we're going to need vacant possession so we can do the work, and we're probably going to look at increasing the rent after the work's done. And the tenant turned around to us and said, look, we're happy for you guys to do the work. We're happy to pay the increased rent. So it's not about just kicking the tenant out and trying to get more money. It's about working with the tenant as well. Unfortunately, in this circumstance, the tenant has chosen to move this time around. There was an issue with the flatmate. The flatmate couldn't afford the increase. Yep. But it's not about just kicking the tenant out and increasing the rent. It's about trying to work with that tenant as well.
Definitely. And I think the media paints a terrible picture for landlords and property owners. The majority of them are mum and dads. They've got a heart and they understand how the mechanics of it work. And for the majority of them, I think it's the stats are ridiculous. It's 80 or 90% of property owners only have like 1 to 2 houses. So, they understand how it works. They're not just these greedy millionaire landlords. They're mums and dads with, their own house and kids and families. So they understand and get that.
And a lot of them are renting themselves.
Definitely. Yeah, 100%. Would you say, do you have a golden nugget, one piece of information you want to share with the audience on today's episode? It's actually been full of golden nuggets, but would you have one thing to finish off on in terms of this topic in today's ep?
I guess something that I like to, I know I have said a couple of times, client, landlord. I like to treat my tenants as clients as well. So keeping your tenants on side with you is going to make it a lot more. It's going to make it's going to make the experience a lot more easier to deal with. So, building a relationship with the tenant is going to help when you have those difficult conversations. They know that they can trust you as well. It's not just us dictating to them, this is what's going to happen. We try and build a relationship with them so that we can, ease that blow. We can work with them. If it's not going to work out in that property, let's find them something else where they can move into. can we help them? Can we put them into another one of our properties? Once you start to build a really good relationship with your tenant, they also become referrers as well. So they start referring business to us. I've got a tenant who's done that for me on numerous occasions. So when it comes to rental increases, having that rapport with your tenant already, they already trust you, and they know that you're not just this money hungry person who is trying to put money into I guess my pocket and into the client's pocket. It's about trying to find a happy median.
Corey, thanks for jumping on the Everything Property podcast. I really appreciate you. If all property managers were like you, I think we'd have a definitely different climate and a different rental market for sure. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate the value, and I'm hopefully I think everyone else would have taken a lot from today's.
Thanks, David.